Step back now. You're
I'm not
refusing a lawful
refusing.
order.
I've shown federal credentials. You haven't verified anything.
I don't care who you say you are.
Then listen carefully. You're detaining a federal official without cause, and this camera's
Turn around.
recording.
Hands behind.
You're not authorized to carry that, Officer Brent Wallace said, one hand hovering over his belt, the other pointing at the black leather case in the woman's hand. It's a federal diplomatic credential, she replied calmly, her tone even but unmistakably firm. I'm cleared by the Office of Homeland Security. They were standing near Gate B-17 of Reagan National Airport. A chill draft swept in each time the automatic doors opened. Overhead, the loudspeakers cycled through boarding announcements muffled by the hum of restless travelers and rolling suitcases. To any bystander, the woman looked like every other business traveler. Tailored navy blazer heels, government-issued badge clipped discreetly to her bag, eyes scanning the departures board. Except she wasn't every other traveler. She was a senior policy director with the White House, and she had just been stopped by a patrol officer who didn't believe she belonged. Wallace narrowed his eyes. Ma'am, step aside and place your bags on the bench. I need to inspect them. His voice was louder now, attracting glances. Phones began to raise. Camera lenses focused. I'm in the middle of an interagency mission, she said. Those bags contain classified working documents protected under federal executive privilege. I've already been screened by TSA PreCheck and Homeland Security protocols. Your interference is unauthorized. Behind Wallace, his partner Kevin Ramirez shifted uneasily. Brent, I think we should call it in before this goes further. I recognize her. She briefed the Joint Task Force last quarter. Wallace ignored him. Nobody is above the law, he said. The woman's name was Aaliyah Monroe. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't panic. She just reached slowly into her bag, pulled out her federal ID, and held it up. This is a United States Executive Branch credential issued under Title 18. My clearance is Level 4. You're detaining me without cause. Wallace looked at the ID, then back at her. This could be fake. We've seen people forge these. And you're seeing one that's real, she replied. Run the ID, confirm the trip manifest, or better yet, call your supervisor. But he didn't. Something in his expression shifted. Not logic, not reason. Ego. A refusal to back down. A refusal to admit he might be wrong in front of witnesses. You're obstructing an investigation. Step away from your bag. I'm not obstructing. I'm asserting my legal rights. The crowd around them had begun to grow. A mother pulled her daughter closer. A young man near the window held his phone up steadily, recording everything. Whispered commentary rippled through the terminal. Isn't that a government ID? Someone muttered. She told him she's with the White House, another voice said. Still, Wallace advanced. Last warning, if you don't comply, I'll be forced to detain you. I've given you my ID. I've complied with screening. There is no probable cause. If you put your hands on me, officer, you're violating multiple federal statutes. But Wallace didn't hear the law. He heard defiance, and he reached for his cuffs. 10 hours earlier, Aaliyah Monroe had been reviewing national security policy drafts in the Situation Room. The morning brief had gone long. A new cyber vulnerability had been flagged by the Department of Defense, and the interagency coordination required urgent refinement. Aaliyah, as Senior Policy Director for Homeland Resilience at the White House, was leading that coordination. She had spent the last 6 weeks rewriting contingency plans to address domestic response capabilities during infrastructure compromise events. It was her job to make sure agencies didn't just talk to each other, but listened. She was 44 years old, the youngest black woman to ever hold her position. Her path there had been anything but easy. Born and raised in Detroit's East Side, Aaliyah was the third daughter of a single mother who worked night shifts at a packing plant. Their apartment building smelled of bleach and cigarette smoke, and she used to study for her AP exams by flashlight when the power was cut. She earned a full scholarship to Spelman, then completed her MPP at Harvard Kennedy School while bartending 4 nights a week. Before the White House, she served 8 years in the State Department and 3 as deputy legal counsel for FEMA. She had worked through hurricanes, civil unrest, mass evacuations. She had testified before Congress on emergency policy gaps. Her white papers had shaped how the federal government distributes aid during climate disasters. But none of those credentials were visible at the airport gate, and Officer Wallace didn't know any of it. Brent Wallace, 37, had spent the last 4 years assigned to Joint Airport Patrol under the Federal Air Marshal Service Collaboration Agreement. He had a solid build, short brown hair, always buzzed tight, and a calm demeanor that made him seem measured at first. His file told a different story. 2 complaints in the last 18 months, both for racial profiling, both quietly closed. In one, he had detained a Haitian diplomat during a layover in Miami because, quote, his French sounded off. In another, he stopped a Nigerian-American professor carrying a World Bank badge and refused to verify its authenticity. In both cases, Wallace acclaimed procedural discretion, no formal reprimand, no required training. The system protected him, and that was part of the problem. Wallace had come from a military police background. He'd served in Kandahar, and some of his colleagues said he hadn't truly adjusted back to civilian context. He liked order, uniforms, obedience. When people questioned his authority, especially people who didn't look like him, his instincts flared. But not everyone around him shared that approach. His patrol partner, Officer Kevin Ramirez, 32, had spent most of his time assigned to diplomatic transit lanes. Ramirez had conducted verifications with embassy security staff, had trained with State Department liaison teams, and had a reputation for restraint. He recognized federal credentials. He knew how real ones felt the weight of the embossed foil, the microprint on the corner. He knew not to push. Ramirez had seen Aliyah once before at a classified policy roundtable 6 months ago when she briefed senior field officers on continuity of government protocols during cyber attack scenarios. He remembered being surprised by how composed she was, how she didn't speak to impress but to clarify. That day, her words carried the weight of experience, not ego. So when he saw Wallace starting to escalate at the gate, Ramirez's gut twisted. He had whispered, "She's not bluffing, Brent. That's real federal ID. We should verify with dispatch, not escalate." But Wallace didn't want verification. He wanted control. And maybe in his mind, Aliyah didn't look like someone who could be in charge. Not at that level. Not with that authority. That was the invisible script running through too many encounters like this one. A script Ramirez recognized. A script Aliyah had lived with her whole life. Because this wasn't the first time Aliyah Monroe had been questioned about what she was carrying. At 19, she was stopped by a store clerk for holding too many books in a college bookstore, asked if she planned to buy them or just walk out. At 26, during her first job at a policy think tank, she was mistaken for the receptionist 3 separate times. At 31, she was asked to prove her security clearance to a male subordinate she was managing. It never ended. She had learned to stay calm, to document, to assert herself within the bounds of legality. She never shouted, never cried, never let them see it land. But it always did, every time a little deeper. So when Officer Wallace raised his voice, when he refused to even run her credentials, when he reached for those cuffs, Aliyah didn't just feel insulted. She felt predicted. Like this was a scene someone had written for her long ago, and no matter what she achieved, she was expected to act it out. Back at the terminal, tension had thickened the air. Aliyah Monroe stood motionless beside the TSA checkpoint bench. Her bag was still sealed, her badge still visible. Officer Brent Wallace stood 2 feet away, palm now resting on the top of his holster, not drawing it yet, but ready. Behind him, Ramirez's silence said everything. Aliyah took a slow breath. "Officer, I'm invoking my right to non-consensual search exemption under federal transport policy. Section 49, CFR 1544-209. You're not authorized to open that bag without verification through proper agency channels." Wallace didn't flinch. "I have reason to believe it contains restricted materials." "It does," she answered. "That's the point. Materials protected under executive privilege." "You're being evasive. I'm being lawful." Several travelers had now stopped completely. A woman in a Delta crew uniform stood frozen near the wall. A teenage boy in a hoodie angled his phone for a better shot. A businessman with a Bluetooth headset slowly removed it from his ear and whispered, "Is this for real?" One mother moved her daughter away, murmuring, "Don't look," but others looked, and kept looking. Aliyah reached back into her coat pocket and held up a laminated card, separate from her ID. It was a pre-issued White House travel verification form, signed that morning by a senior logistics officer at the National Security Council. She turned it so Wallace could see the seal. "This is the protocol. You don't need to like it, you just need to follow it." Wallace looked at the document, then back at her, then to the crowd. He was aware now of being watched, of being recorded, and something in him twisted not into caution, but into defiance. The kind that doesn't want to be corrected publicly, the kind that confuses accountability with humiliation. Ramirez tried one last time. "She's not resisting," he said, voice lower now, but steady. "We're getting calls from dispatch. Someone higher up is already asking why she was stopped." Wallace didn't acknowledge him. Instead, he stepped forward. "I'm detaining you for failure to comply with a lawful order. Place your hands behind your back." "You've given no legal basis," Aliyah replied, "and no verification has been attempted. You're violating federal chain of command protocol." Wallace didn't blink. You're escalating an unlawful stop, she continued, voice sharper now, eyes burning not with rage but with precision. And you've been warned. A murmur rolled through the crowd. She said she works for the White House. I think she's a federal official. One woman called out, "You should check her credentials, man. She showed you proof." Wallace turned his head briefly toward the voice, his jaw clenched. Then he turned back to Aaliyah. "Ma'am, turn around. Now." She didn't move. Not out of defiance, but because she knew what came next had already been decided. She looked directly at Ramirez. He wouldn't meet her gaze. Then she looked into the lens of the closest phone camera and said clearly, "I am being detained without cause by a patrol officer who has refused to verify federal documentation. I have complied with all screening and have presented lawful identification." A pause. "This is now a matter of record." Wallace stepped forward and reached for her wrist. She didn't resist. But the moment his hand touched her arm, the terminal seemed to exhale. Gasps. The click of phone cameras. The whir of recording. And from somewhere in the back, a voice rose up, not angry but exhausted. "Why is this still happening?" The handcuffs clicked shut like a verdict. Cold steel against warm skin. One cuff, then the other. Tight but not yet cruel. Deliberate, not rushed. As if Wallace wanted every eye in that terminal to see it. As if restraint wasn't about procedure anymore but performance. Aaliyah Monroe didn't flinch. She stood tall, head high, shoulders squared, gaze locked forward. Her wrists were behind her back, but her posture refused to bend. The crowd shifted, restless now. The energy had changed. "That's excessive," someone said near the ticket counter. "Why is she in cuffs? She didn't even move." The teenager live streaming whispered to his phone. "They're arresting a black woman in a suit. She said she's from the White House. This is insane." Wallace led her toward the security annex near the TSA offices. Every step echoed. The automatic doors to the hallway shut behind them, cutting off the sound of passengers, leaving only the squeak of boots and the low hum of fluorescent lights. No one spoke for the first 30 seconds. Then Ramirez, following behind, said it, quiet, like an instinct. "You should have waited for verification." Wallace didn't reply. Inside the annex, Aaliyah was seated in a gray plastic chair bolted to the floor. Her hands were still cuffed. Wallace began filling out the field detention report, ignoring the silent protest vibrating in the air around them. But it was there. She could feel it in the rhythm of his breathing, uneven. He was beginning to realize that something had gone very wrong. Aaliyah's eyes didn't leave him. "There's a secure line in this building," she said. "Use it to call the National Security Council travel desk. My clearance will be confirmed in 90 seconds. Still he hesitated, because now the gravity of his choices was creeping in. He looked down at the sealed laptop bag on the desk. The red tape marked, "Classified, do not open without authorization," was visible even from the corner. He hadn't dared unzip it, not yet, because despite everything a part of him knew, he had arrested someone who wasn't just important. She was protected. She was documented. She was known. And now she was waiting. Inside her head, Aaliyah was already cataloging. Time of detention, approximately 2:41 p.m. Location Terminal B, Reagan National Airport. Witnesses estimated 22 civilians, at least 3 recording. Items in custody, secure bag, diplomatic ID, federal brief. Violation, detainment without cause under color of law, potential breach of federal immunity. She didn't need notes. This wasn't her first time documenting an incident, just the first time she'd be the subject. Wallace moved behind the desk, reaching for the internal phone. But before he dialed, he looked at Ramirez. "What if we're wrong?" he asked. Ramirez didn't answer, because it was too late for questions. The wrong had already happened. The video existed. The cuffs were on. The detainment was logged. The bag, untouched, still radiated warning. And across the country, an automated system had already flagged her missed check-in with the Office of Homeland Resilience. Someone in Washington was calling her phone. Someone in Washington was about to ask where their senior policy director had disappeared. And when they did, Wallace's name would be in the report. So would Ramirez's. So would every minute of this detention. Aaliyah sat in silence, breathing evenly, hands still behind her, eyes forward. She didn't speak again, because now she didn't need to. The system would speak for her, and it would be loud. The phone rang just once before it was answered. "Office of the National Security Council Travel Operations Desk. This line is recorded." Wallace hesitated suddenly, unsure how to begin. He cleared his throat. "This is Officer Brent Wallace, Airport Security at Reagan National. I have a female individual in custody claiming to be a federal official traveling on government business. Name Aaliyah Monroe. Claims senior White House clearance." A pause on the other end. Not confusion, recognition. Then a voice now sharper. "Did you say Monroe Policy Director Monroe is overdue for check-in? Why is she in your custody?" Wallace glanced up at Aaliyah, still sitting in the gray chair, still silent, still waiting. I'm attempting to verify her credentials. She refused to comply with the bag search. That bag is protected under federal statute, the voice cut in. You had no jurisdiction to detain her without contacting this office? Has the bag been opened? No, Wallace said quickly. But she was. I'm transferring you now, the voice interrupted, to Assistant Deputy Chief Lorna Gates. Stay on the line. A click, 2 seconds of silence. Then another voice. Calm, precise, chilling in its authority. This is Deputy Chief Gates. Are you in possession of Director Monroe? Wallace swallowed. Yes. You are to release her immediately. No further questions. No additional interaction. Stand by for secure contact from DHS Office of Legal Affairs and the White House Operations Center. A complaint is being filed as we speak. Ramirez looked over, eyes wide. His posture had changed. Hands off his belt. No more tension in his shoulders. Just dread. Wallace turned pale. He hung up slowly, then turned back toward Aaliyah. She didn't move. She didn't even blink. But the shift in power was palpable. Heavy in the air like static before a thunderclap. Wallace fumbled with the cuffs. His fingers were shaking now. The clink of metal echoed as the restraint was removed from her left wrist, then her right. No apology. Not yet. Just silence. Ramirez stepped forward. Director Monroe, we didn't know. Her voice was steady. You were told. You didn't listen. She stood slowly, rubbing the faint red lines on her wrists. Then she reached into her bag, retrieved a small black phone, and began dialing. I need to report in, she said flatly. Your office will be receiving a request for the full incident report, surveillance footage, and body cam recordings within the hour. Wallace backed toward the door. Ma'am, don't, she said, not raising her voice. Just prepare for what comes next. Another officer entered the room. A lieutenant with silver hair and a name tag reading Sanderson. His expression was drawn, tense, as though he'd just run to get there. Director Monroe, he began, on behalf of this department, I want to... She cut him off with a glance. Not out of cruelty, but necessity. Where's your secure terminal? This way. The two exited the room, the door swinging closed behind them, and for a long moment Wallace and Ramirez stood alone in the silence they'd made. Outside, the terminal had resumed its rhythm. But in Washington, the storm had already begun. The first video surfaced before sunset. Shot by the teenage boy in the hoodie, it opened with the unmistakable sound of tension. Officer Wallace's voice, flat and forceful. Aaliyah Monroe, calm and deliberate. The camera shook slightly as the handcuffs were applied. The title read, White House official detained at airport for what? Within 6 hours, the clip had over 2.3 million views. By midnight, it reached 12. The hashtags trended globally. Had she told you? Executive, while black? Credentialed and cuffed. Across Twitter, legal analysts began dissecting the confrontation in real time. Civil rights attorneys broke down the violations frame by frame. One former federal prosecutor tweeted, that woman warned him 5 separate times. This is a textbook unlawful detention. CNN picked it up next, then MSNBC, then Reuters. At 7:12 a.m. the next morning, the White House press secretary released an official statement. Director Aaliyah Monroe was unlawfully detained by airport patrol officers during an official assignment. The matter is being addressed through legal and administrative channels. No denial, no softening, just certainty. The internal investigation launched within 24 hours. Body cam footage was pulled. Dispatch records audited. TSA logs cross-referenced with White House travel manifests. It all matched her version. Every word. Wallace's report contained multiple inaccuracies. He'd written that Monroe refused to identify herself. The video clearly showed her presenting federal ID. He claimed she was evasive and agitated. The footage showed her still measured professional. By day 3, the Department of Homeland Security placed him on indefinite leave. By day 5, Aaliyah's legal team filed a formal complaint. The opening paragraph read, this filing concerns the unlawful detention and public restraint of Director Aaliyah Monroe, a senior federal official operating under full legal clearance. The arrest was conducted without probable cause, without verification, and in direct violation of federal protocols governing interagency transport. The lawsuit named Officer Brent Wallace personally. It also named the airport authority, the patrol unit, and 2 senior supervisors who had approved Wallace's prior record without action. The civil claims included violation of Fourth Amendment rights, violation of federal immunity statute under Title 18, false imprisonment, defamation of professional reputation, emotional distress, and unlawful use of force. Aaliyah didn't speak to the press, but her silence carried weight. Others spoke for her. Former DHS Director Antonia Ruiz said in an interview, this isn't just about credentials, it's about disbelief. They didn't believe she could be who she said she was. That's the pattern. Public pressure escalated. Major civil rights organizations held a joint press conference in D.C. The Congressional Black Caucus demanded oversight hearings. A group of former federal officials, all women, signed an open letter. "We've all had our ID questioned, but this one was caught on camera, and the world saw it." Then came the internal audit. Wallace's record showed a pattern. In his 6 years on airport patrol, 87% of his field stops involved black or brown travelers. He had received 3 verbal warnings, 2 written ones. None had been escalated. No remedial training was enforced. The report concluded Officer Wallace demonstrated a repeated failure to follow federal verification protocol, culminating in the high-profile, unlawful detention of a senior government official. His actions constitute a breach of public trust and operational misconduct. He was fired the following week. No appeal. No severance. No pension. His badge was revoked. His name entered into the Federal Decertification Registry, barring him from future law enforcement employment nationwide. But the case didn't end there. The city faced pressure to settle. Aaliyah's legal team demanded public acknowledgement, full access to training materials, and structural reforms, not just money. The final settlement, $975,000 in damages. Mandatory retraining of all airport officers. New verification protocols with direct federal hotline access. Quarterly bias audit reviews. And the release of all documentation related to prior complaints against Wallace. But Aaliyah declined to accept the payout personally. She redirected the funds. Every dollar went into a civil liberties legal defense fund for women of color in federal service. Her public statement was only 3 sentences long. "I didn't sue for myself. I sued because I could. Because too many can't." It landed harder than any press conference. The incident became case study material in police academies. It was cited in 2 federal hearings on government official protections. A clip of her calm words at the terminal was played in law school ethics classes. And as for Ramirez, he submitted a sworn affidavit. Detailed everything. Took accountability for not stepping in sooner. Requested reassignment to interagency verification training. When asked why, he said, "Because silence is a decision too." Legally speaking, Officer Brent Wallace violated multiple statutes the moment he placed handcuffs on Aaliyah Monroe. The 4th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Case law. Terry v. Ohio, Hebel versus 6th Judicial District Court, Arizona versus Johnson. All affirm the requirement of reasonable suspicion. Wallace had none. Aaliyah had cleared TSA. She held valid government credentials. She asserted her identity. She requested verification. She did not resist. His actions crossed the line from enforcement to unlawful detention. But it didn't stop there. Federal law grants additional protections to government officials operating under the color of duty. Title 18. U.S. Code FAR 1011 makes it a federal offense to impede or interfere with a federal officer in the performance of their duties. By detaining Aaliyah, Wallace didn't just violate her rights, he obstructed an interagency operation. What does that mean in practice? It means that who she was, her status, her mission, her credentials weren't just symbolic. They carried legal weight. Ignoring them wasn't just a mistake. It was a crime. But the legal angle is only part of the story. Because what truly happened at Gate B-17 wasn't about law. It was about belief. Or more precisely, the lack of it. Aaliyah Monroe presented every signal society claims to respect. Professional dress, calm tone, official ID. And yet in Wallace's eyes, it wasn't enough. Why? Because unconscious bias, when left unacknowledged, becomes indistinguishable from willful prejudice. Social psychologists call it confirmation bias. You expect someone not to belong, so everything they do becomes suspect. Even their calmness becomes a threat. Their knowledge becomes attitude. Their credentials become questionable. You stop seeing facts. You start seeing a story you wrote long before they arrived. And that's how someone ends up in cuffs for doing everything right. So what should you do if it happens to you? First, stay calm. Not because you owe anyone composure, but because it protects you. Second, document everything. Dates, times, statements, request badge numbers. Ask for supervisor contact. You have that right. Third, record if it's legal in your state. Video is often the only defense against a false narrative. Fourth, know the number of a civil rights attorney or a legal defense nonprofit that does. Finally, remember, asserting your rights is not non-compliance, it's civic participation. Aaliyah Monroe knew that. That's why she didn't beg. She didn't shout. She didn't perform. She documented. She invoked. She endured. And because she did, thousands more saw what racial bias really looks like. Not loud, not violent, but quiet. Routine. Institutional. hidden behind policy and posture and tone, until it's not, until a video goes viral, until a lawsuit forces accountability, until a nation asks itself again, why didn't he believe her? And what would have happened if no one had recorded? So let's not wait for the next viral video. Let's teach officers that credentials don't have a color. Let's train institutions that authority isn't a performance. Let's remind each other that respect isn't something to be earned by black professionals twice as hard, it's something they're already owed. You watch this story to the end. That means something. Now do something. Share it. Talk about it. Remember it. Because the next Aaliyah Monroe might not have a badge, or a title, or a camera watching, but she'll still deserve justice.